Thinking about leaving your high-paying career? Wondering how to make it possible? I did, and in today's video, I want to share with you my exact process up to the point of leaving. In this video, I break down the exact steps I took from how I prepared financially to the time frame, as well as my doubts and fears, so that you can see what I did to determine if it was possible, or rather, in my case, how it was possible. I'm sharing this with the hope that it helps you if you're in the same place I was, even if your reasons are different. This is a follow-up to my personal story of why I walked away from a 500,000 plus career, where I cover my motivations for leaving and the one thing that created the tipping point. There's one other thing I want to mention before we get into the details. Since leaving, I've had several former colleagues reach out and I've helped them through the process too. What I'm sharing today is my process only, although I can say that they've gone through a very similar process, despite different reasons for leaving and different things to sort out before they could take the leap. I'm Erin and this is my story. You can check out more about me on my channel page. I took into consideration several factors: current annual expenses, what lifestyle I wanted with no salary, how my husband would feel and whether I had his support, how I wanted to spend the first 6 months after leaving, and what my financial runway looked like, from what almost money I was leaving on the table to stocks, bonuses, vesting, and raises. I considered what it would feel like to leave the intellectual world and how I would identify myself when people inevitably asked, "What do you do for work?" How would I tell my amazing team? How could I leave them without seeing them through to their next opportunity within the organization? And what would I regret? It all started in October of the previous year. I'd had a rough day at work. I'd say it was a 3 out of 10, and I'd been having more rough days than great days. But those days weren't technically any different than the weeks and months and years in the past. I was just more affected by the small, petty, trivial things that shouldn't really matter. Those trivial moments were getting under my skin. I also realized I didn't have anything else in mind that I wanted to go do, so there wasn't an obvious, clear next step. I sat down one morning while I was thinking about all of it, and I scribbled down in my work notebook 2 columns: leave, stay. And I listed out everything I could think of, and I asked myself, what would I regret more, leaving or staying? In that moment, I knew I would regret staying. But it was also a big decision, and it didn't need to happen overnight. I didn't really put a timeline on it then. It was just a direction to start pointing towards. Let's talk about the money side first. In January, I got brave enough to look at my annual spending, and I listed everything out by category in an Excel file and put in the numbers. It was scary to take a hard look at the numbers, and something that I realized that I had been avoiding in the couple of months prior when I knew I needed to change direction. But it was also helpful. I could see the big categories and the small ones. And I looked at where expenses would naturally go up or down based on the change. For example, switching from my health insurance at my work for our whole family to my husband's health insurance at a small startup would cause our monthly healthcare expense to go up. My kids were starting to play less ice hockey, so all those private lessons that are required when you play that sport would go down. And this is because they were less interested in ice hockey and more interested in pursuing other things. And so it was an expense that would naturally decline regardless of whether I kept working or not working, but I didn't need to factor that into my future kind of annual expenses, stuff like that. And there was something amongst all of this that was really important to me. I don't have extraordinary tastes and I don't overspend. I save every month, and there wasn't a lot that I wanted to change about my lifestyle. What I didn't want to do was start living in a minimalist lifestyle or massively change how I was living. So the calculations that I was making were more or less looking at how much do I spend now, what will change that I can't really do anything about, less ice hockey, higher healthcare costs, and looking at what are my expenses for the next 1, 2, 3 years that I think if I keep living life the way that I'm currently living it. A couple of the things that I kept on the list: weekly massages, annual gym membership, annual beach parking pass, the weekend family meal that we would all go out to. I added some things to the list too, some one-time activities that I knew we were going to do. A long trip to Europe for the whole family during the summer. That was a one-time expense. I didn't need to add it to the annual, but I needed to account for it. And there were some things not on the list. And this is about how I live my life. So I have no car payment because I paid for a new car cash a couple of years ago. My previous car was 15 years old and I saved up for a long time, and I expect that car to go another 15 years. So I don't have a car payment. I also don't have credit card debt. I do use credit cards. I put every single thing I can on my credit card so that I can get that 1%, 2%, 5% cash back, but I pay them off every single month. So those are two things that I didn't have to contend with in terms of what I was putting on my money list. One other useful thing that I did was to group the expenses into categories. So there's the fixed expenses, and then there were the expenses that were around lifestyle or self-care or travel, that sort of thing. So by putting those in groups, I could see an overall amount per group and not just by line item. I found that to be a really useful activity, and I wish that I would have done that sooner on a regular basis so that I could look at it every 3 to 6 months. Finally, the last thing I did with this list was I summed up all of the expenses for the last year as one total, and then I summed up all of the planned expenses, setting aside one-time expenses, and I looked at those, and they were relatively the same. If I'm being totally transparent, there was not a lot of change there. And then I added in that summer vacation as a first year expenses, and then for year 2 and onwards, I took out that big summer vacation. It's probably important to mention at this point that my husband and I treat our relationship as a true partnership. So that means 50-50 on everything that is part of the family dynamic. So mortgage, food, electricity, things like that. We have a joint account and we put an equal amount of money in. So I needed to factor in, when I was making my list, my half of all of that, plus anything outside of that are my own individual expenses. I share that not because I'm recommending it. It works great for us, but I share that so that you can have some context for how I was thinking about my calculations and how that did and didn't factor into our overall financial experience as a family. So at that moment in time, I did this list in January, and I had just nearly 3 years runway. However, if I factored in an upcoming bonus, knowing that if I stayed until the end of June or early July at my company, factoring in a bonus and additional paychecks between the January and the June, if that were my, let's say, leaving date, I would have had nearly 4 years. And this is factoring in the summer vacation. Did I consult anybody? Yes, I consulted my executive coach, and we talked about trying to do a severance package. And at the end of the day, I decided that since I was leaving for personal reasons, it didn't feel like the right thing in terms of my brand and my integrity and my character, who I strive to be every single day. I didn't feel like it was the right thing for me to do, to go and look for an exit package, although I know that that is certainly an option, and I probably could have negotiated that. So no, I did not pursue one, and I did not get one. Ironically, a few weeks after I put this list together was the tipping point, and my why video, I go into details around my driving factors and then the tipping point, so you can catch up with that there. So my tipping point came in February, and then I immediately gave notice and I left in March. March 8th was my last day. So as of the filming of this video, that was about 14 months ago, approximately 14 months ago. And I had 3 years of runway, just thereabouts, in savings. So let's talk about time frame. My total time frame. So I started in October in the planning, and I actually gave notice in the very beginning of February, and I left on March 8th. And I had a total, so that's a total of 5.5 months, let's say, was my total time frame from when I kind of knew I needed to go, when I genuinely knew that I needed to change direction, from the actual date that I left corporate life. Another question that's come up for me that I think might be helpful to know is, did I change any of how I was living and my expenses during that time? And my very short answer is no, I didn't. Some things naturally came onto my plate and some things naturally left, like the ice hockey, for example. But what that time did give me was time to reflect on whether or not the things that I did spend money on in my everyday life were things that I still wanted to be spending money on, such as, did I still want to get a weekly massage? And my answer to that was a very strong yes. I did have a think about, as I was heading down the path, whether or not that made sense. Now that we have timeline and finances covered, let's talk about my fears and doubts and concerns. First up, even though I knew I could cover my half of the finances, what I wanted from my husband was his full support of my decision. So even though I 100% owned the decision and would still be contributing to my half, I could arguably say it was none of his business, but I value our relationship very much, and I knew that there would be hard moments for me in the months following such a separation from something that had been such a huge part of my life for so long. And I really wanted to know that he was supportive of my decision, that he understood the underlying reasons, and that he would be supportive of whatever I wanted to do next, however long that took. So this is a kind of money aside support from my life partner. And it did take a few months for him to really get his head around it and realize that I was actually serious about this, because as I explained in my other video, my overall package was over $500,000. And so from his vantage point, he's very money driven. I am far less money driven. And so I really wanted to make sure that I 100% had his support and belief in me. And I knew that I would not be able to walk away unless I had that. And I did have that from him. That was one thing that was really big on my mind. The second thing that was really big on my mind is I had a couple of people on my team that I cared so deeply about, and they were at that time on the cusp of kind of getting to the next level of where they were going in their careers, and I really genuinely wanted to be there for part of it. I was feeling quite emotional about what I would tell them and how I would tell them, and then who would take care of them and see them to that next step and continue to lift them up and help their best work shine in the organization. That I think that was probably one of the things that I worried over and had sleepless nights over the very most. And I can tell you, hindsight is 2020. 14 months on, I'm regularly in touch with the two people that I really, really wanted to kind of see through. And one of the things that was really weighing on me heavily in this decision. So I suppose hindsight says where there's a will, or where there is a deep connection, don't worry about it. Those deep connections, if they're meant to be, will still be there. When it came to what I would tell people, this one actually wasn't very hard because I've never been my job. I've always been lots of things. And so I didn't worry about it that much. I'd love to hear whether you'd like me to talk about the months that followed my leaving. It's been 14 months since I closed that chapter of my life, and I have lots of thoughts. Until next time, take care and stay true to yourself.